Today I'm going to rank every Resident Evil game from Resident Evil 5 to Resident Evil 4 Remake, and every spin-off from how scary they are. This is a part 2 video, so if you haven't already, check out the video where I cover all the original Resident Evil games from Resident Evil 1 all the way to Resident Evil 4. As a quick refresher, the categories we have are survival horror, horror, spooky, action horror, and Resident Evil 6. And one last thing before we start, a couple of people in the comment section of the last video pointed out my flawed logic when ranking the original Resident Evil. I ranked it on how it was when it came out, even though I can't really know how it was back then. So to keep it true to my actual opinion, I'm gonna move it down to spooky. But with that being said, next up is Resident Evil 5. This is when it decided the future what Resident Evil was going to be. Will the series go back to survival horror or go further into the action? And as we know, they chose the action. This game can't even really be called a horror game. It should be called Gears or Biohazard instead of Resident Evil. This game introduced the BSAA, which is literally a military force made for fighting monsters, which basically eliminates all of the horror. You are no longer a single police officer surviving with limited resources. Now you're a sexy army man, Chris Redfield, come on, punching zombies in the face. You got a giant gun, but not as giant as your dick. Board in the way, just punch it. Yeah, come on. That's basically Resident Evil 5 in a nutshell. This game is the climax of the original story with Chris Redfield and Wesker. Wesker is absolutely ridiculous in this game. Throughout the series, he's cold and calculated. The guy in the chair, the guy behind everything. He's always watching, always learning, always has a plan, like Dutch Van Dalen. He's a lot like Darth Vader in a way. He's usually behind the scenes, but when he actually shows up, you know shit's about to go down. In the game, he starts off like that, but by the end, he loses his fucking mind and becomes the goofiest comic book villain ever. By the end, he's going on about complete global saturation and always screaming, Chris! I'm gonna have to step away from my mic for this. You can't hide forever! Let me clarify something for you, Chris. I don't think of myself as a king. No, I am a god, and even kings bow to gods. He's just screaming all of the time and I love it. This game introduced co-op, which automatically makes it less scary. This game really isn't scary. I'm gonna put it in action horror. This game is only scary if you're like extremely racist or something, I don't know. Now Resident Evil 6 is a game. This is a lot of people's least favorite Resident Evil game. I like this game to a degree. I think the story kind of sucks dick, and I think this game is way too long. But this game is still really fun, but not even slightly scary. They said this was the Resident Evil game to end all Resident Evil games, and that each campaign will be a different playstyle and tone, but that was kind of a lie. Each campaign is full-on action. I don't even know if I can call it action horror. I guess Leon's campaign and a little bit of Jake's tries to be scary, but it isn't. RE6 is so special, gets its own little spot at the bottom. Here you go, RE6. Good boy. Resident Evil was in a really weird place in the 2010s. The sales were pretty good, but the reception of the games wasn't so good. The core fanbase was really not happy with the way the series was going. So Capcom decided to do a soft reset with Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, or Biohazard 7 Resident Evil in Japan. Not important, I just think the Japanese name is funny. They went full on horror in this game, taking mild inspiration from other horror games very popular at the time. They took the Silent Hill 2 route and simplified the story. Just a man looking for his wife, leaving all the complicated lore stuff to the background, which makes the story in the world much easier to get sucked into, adding to the horror. And for one of the first times in the whole series, you're not playing as a badass cop, agent, or Chris Redfield. You're just a normal guy with nothing but his will to help him survive. This game is constantly changing the type of horror. The start is very much a PT style walking simulator, but after the intro, there's a classic style survival horror section. Then after that, there's a creepy body horror bug part. Then the jigsaw part. Everyone has a different scariest part in this game and it's great. This game very much deserves to be put in the survival horror category. Resident Evil 2 was one of the first Resident Evil games I had ever played, and it really shocked me by how far they went with the gore. This game is gruesome. Not just in cutscenes, but in basic gameplay. These are without a doubt the greatest zombies in all of gaming. This game stays true to classic survival horror game design, while making the game accessible for modern players by adding things like autosave, and a new and more modern camera perspective. Not that I think fixed cameras and tank controls can't be modern, just those are hard to get into for brand new players. I have friends who still haven't played RE1 Remake because of the tank controls. If you haven't already, there's an amazing mod that makes the game fully playable with tank controls and fixed cameras, and I 100% recommend it. I played it twice and it really brought back the classic feeling. This game is very quiet, which makes when something jumps out at you all the more terrifying. Most of the jump scares are in gameplay and unscripted, which makes every second that much more tense. Zombies fake their deaths for much longer in this game as well, waiting for you to walk over them to attack, making checking bodies a requirement. This is one of the first games to truly scare the shit out of me, so I'm putting it in survival horror. And while we're here, hello everybody, my name is Volskate. I make a ton of Resident Evil and other variety of videos, so if you're enjoying so far, do a big old Chris Redfield punch on the like button, and subscribe so you can see what else I'm gonna make. And while making this video, I reached 1,000 subscribers, so thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate it, but back to the video. video. So fun fact about me, Resident Evil 3 Remake was my first Resident Evil game. Because of that, it was pretty tense the first time I played it. But in retrospect, it's really not scary. Especially compared to the original version. If you've seen my part 2 video, you know how I feel about the original, and Nemesis in particular. The new version of Nemesis is cool and scary for the first little section. But after that one 10-minute little bit, he's just relegated to shitty boss fights and set pieces. Hunters and Hunter Gammas are kinda scary just because of their insta-kill attacks. The Hunter Gamma eating you alive is especially shocking. But the game is super fast-paced, and does not have the perfect, quiet, dark atmosphere of RE2. So it's really not that scary in my opinion, so I'm gonna put the game in spooky. Resident Evil Village kinda feels like Resident Evil 6 done right. It has multiple Resident Evil game styles merged into one rollercoaster of a game. Most of the game is like Resident Evil 4, but it has sections that are more like Resident Evil 7 for example, or a part that is straight up Silent Hill. This game has amazing sound design, like something rustling through the bushes next to you, and twigs snapping, or slight growling in the distance, all of it putting you on edge. This game handles jump scares really well too, but they're all scripted unlike RE2, so after the first time it loses its impact. The environmental storytelling in this game is great, especially in Castle Dimitrescu. Stumbling across a note and imagining all the horrors that happen in this castle is scarier than actually seeing it in some ways. You can't talk about the horror in this game without talking about House Beneviento. I actually live streamed my first ever playthrough of this game on Twitch, and I noped out and ended my stream for the day when I reached that fucking baby. Not my proudest moment, but it just shows how horrifying that whole part is. If the game didn't have the baby part in it, I would put it proudly and spooky, but because of that goddamn baby, it gets pushed up to horror. I don't want to go too in depth about RE4 Remake here, because I have a whole video going into it, which I'm still super proud of, and a lot of my opinions are still exactly the same. But RE4 Remake is definitely scarier than the original. It's still action horror, but leans into the survival horror core a lot more. Enemies are stronger in a lot of ways, and you get a lot less ammo and healing items. So resource management is automatically more important. The new realistic graphics add to the horror as well. Being able to see every gruesome detail in the enemies adds so much. Something as simple as seeing the new dog design shocked me and scared the life out of me. I also made a whole video on the intro to this game, which I'm not really proud of, so please don't watch that video, come on. I don't like that video. Because I think they nailed the horror of the intro. It's a really slow burn, especially compared to the original. And I almost wish I played the remake before the original, just because of that. I'm actually curious to read how people who played the remake first felt about it. So if you have, tell me down below, I'm super interested. U3 is in the DLC of this game, but they kinda missed the point of why it was scary. But every other major horror moment returns in amazing horrific detail. I'm putting this game in the horror section. I'm putting this game in the horror section. Jesus Christ. Because it's not the scariest, but it's still pretty scary, especially on the first playthrough. But that's what the mainline games ranked. I was going to go in depth into spin-offs, but I realized I have basically nothing to say about most of them. So if you're curious about how I would rank these spin-offs, it's right here. Resident Evil Gaiden and Resident Evil Dead Aim are unranked because I just don't know enough about them. But yeah, thank you for making it to the end of the video. This video took a while to make, mainly the writing part, because I'm not a very good writer. But thank you so much for making it to the end. If you liked it, liked. If you like me, subscribe. If you didn't like it, dislike.